103.2 Preston FM.
Keeping it local.
On 103.2 FM.
From Grusner to Grimsby
and Frenchwood to Farringdon Park.
It's your community.
Your radio.
Your Preston FM.
And nice as always to say hello to my first guest in the studio. It's Sue Jeffries. So Sue, a very good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Hughie.
And since we last met, best of show in Manchester with Dig the City and the recycled edible garden. So sounds very interesting, Sue. What is a recycled edible garden?
Right, well, the idea came to me because I work as a volunteer in my local community garden, which is a kitchen garden near Turton Tower. And obviously, as a kitchen garden, we're trying to follow the old Victorian principles of the garden. So we grow a lot of edible crops, and we grow some flowers as well. And we also grow flowers you can eat. So the idea of the little show garden we put together for Manchester's Garden Festival, Dig the City, was we wanted to do a little bit of our garden in Manchester. So we wanted to make it easy to transport and something that other people could do as well, something they could copy quite easily in their own gardens. So we found lying around the garden a rusty old wheelbarrow with a hole in it, an old fence panel, a bit of tree stump and a couple of old pallets. So we put all those together, make a little garden design, and we planted it all up with things you could eat. So things that looked attractive and were nice to look at, but things you could eat as well.
Wow, it conjures up that kind of nice country garden scene, doesn't it, that?
Yeah.
And before we talk more about the edible garden over there in Manchester, Dig the City, is that quite a popular event in the city? Is it annual event?
Yeah, it's just getting going now. It was the third year this year, and each year it's grown a little bit more. It's fascinating, really, because it comes hard on the heels of Tatton Park Flower Show in Cheshire, which is a huge, spectacular garden event with massive marquees and huge show gardens. So Manchester's is a bit different because all the gardens and all the activities are all in the centre of Manchester on pedestrianised areas. So we've not got any ground or soil to deal with. So the show gardens there and the activities all have to be something you can transport in and plonk on a piece of paving. So I think it's interesting because it's inspiring to people who live in a lot of urban areas and town areas. A lot of people I talk to, they've just got a backyard that's been paved over. You know, they haven't got a lot of soil or a big area of grass. So it meant that all of the people who did designs there were all things that were easy to reproduce for people who live in towns and suburban areas as well.
And that's quite a nice thing to hold it within the city, isn't it? Because we get quite used to gardening events out in the country or in rural areas, but to have something right in the centre of the city. And were you finding lots of people were interested in what was happening and coming along to talk to you?
Yeah, it was interesting. We met a family with young children, and they lived in an apartment in Manchester at the end of Deansgate, and they just had a balcony, but they were growing vegetables and flowers on their balcony, so they were very interested, particularly in the pallets we used, because we turned the pallets vertical, so they're standing upright, and then we put some landscape membrane at the back, just stapled it on. And then we planted through the slats in the pallets, if you can imagine that.
Yes.
So we basically made vertical planters. So something like that you can just put against a wall, you know, or the edge of your balcony, I suppose. And it means you can increase the amount of space you've got, you know, for growing things.
That's quite a good idea. I mean, any small garden, that would complement it quite well, wouldn't it,
Yeah.
doing that?
And you're turning what might be quite a boring wall or a boring fence into something that's alive.
And living.
It's got vegetables in it, yeah.
So what kind of things did you have then at the Dig in the City then, Sue? And did you eat them all at the end?
Didn't eat all of them, but we ate quite a few. So in our pallet, we had a lot of sort of salad crops. So we had mixes of different lettuces. So we had a bit of rocket in there, a bit of red lettuce, radicchio. We had bits of radish in there as well. and some spring onions at the top. So a range of different salad crops. Now, because we had to dismantle a garden at the end of the show, we harvested it all at once. But if that had been in someone's garden, you can just cut and come again with the lettuce. So you can just snip a few bits off for your tea one day, let it grow, and just keep taking little bits off, and it will keep growing, and you'll be able to harvest it for quite a while, actually, because the plants are quite happy growing away there, and you just take the bits you want and leave the rest to carry on growing.
And were there many other contributors taking part?
We had a few of I don't know if you've heard of Incredible Edible.
No.
That was a community garden scheme that started over in Todmorden, and it's spreading across Lancashire, so I'm sure it will arrive. I think it might have arrived at Preston.
Right.
I think there might be somewhere. I'm sure I've heard of somewhere in Preston, yeah. And they are all community volunteer gardening groups. So there's Salford and Manchester now, Rochdale, Rosendale, coming over that way to Worley now. So I think there might be one in Preston as well. And they had a few different stands. There was a great group from Beswick in Manchester that had an edible bus stop.
Yes.
So they'd recreated a bus stop, and it had a roof on it that was edible. It had tomato plants growing up the back of it and salad crops in the side. So that was an interesting idea as well. So different community groups. And Hume Community Garden Centre, that's an organic centre, sort of South Manchester. They won Best in Show for the big gardens, and they'd created these raised beds out of old scaffolding plants. So again, something anyone could, put together. It's not expensive. And they'd created these fruit tree arches. So they'd grown up these apple trees and cherry trees and sort of bent them over to meet at the top and form this beautiful arch with fruit all along it.
And again, the nice thing about this is the interest that it brings to people who are just passing by, or maybe who are not really into gardening. And also, like you said, the family who lived at the end of Deansgate in a flat with their children. It's very interesting for children to be able to see what you can actually do in a garden.
Yeah. I mean, when we had our garden sort of on show near Manchester Cathedral, we also ran some free seed sowing workshops that myself and other people in the garden, and we had lots of kids coming up and all very keen to they sowed a little pot of seed and then got to take it home with them. And there's quite a few, and often the kids know more about gardening than their parents sometimes, because they've done it at school. So they'll sort of have a good idea of what sort of vegetables they like and what they want to grow.
So apart from all the hard work that you had put into it anyway, what do you think it was that swung it best in show for you? It was Dermot Gavin who was the judge. I don't know if people have heard of him. He's an Irish garden designer. He's been on television a few times. Yes, I know the guy. And he's very much into sort of experimental garden design and slightly wacky things. He did that design, I think it was at Chelsea the year before this year, with that elevated garden. That's right. That went up on a crane. Yes. So he's a bit wacky. But he liked the fact that I think it was a community garden and we're all volunteers, and we'd made the garden from bits and pieces lying around in the garden, so we hadn't spent a lot of money on it. And that it was edible, and we'd grown everything from seed as well. We hadn't bought any plants. Everything in the garden we'd actually grown ourselves. And the fact that we did the workshops too, and we're trying to encourage families and young kids to have a go themselves. So I think he was interested in that part of it, really, the whole package of it. And that is nice, isn't it? When when it is recognised, all the hard work that you've put into it. I mean, is it very difficult? Because I've never really tried to grow vegetables or anything edible in the garden from seed. I've always thought it might be quite difficult to do that. Is it quite easy to grow most things from seed? I think that there's various vegetables are probably your easiest one. The ones we had in the garden actually growing in the wheelbarrow were something called a mange-tout pea. So that's the pea where you eat it in the whole pod. And if you buy a pack of those in the supermarket, usually they can be a couple of quid sometimes for a tiny little packet. They are very, very easy to grow. So you can grow them in a pot or a wheelbarrow, as we did. Yes. And they'll grow quite quickly. So usually maximum a couple of months from you putting the seed in, it will have flowered and produced pods you can start eating. And it'll flower and produce pods for
several weeks, so you'll have a nice sort of crop of them. They're very easy to grow. They don't get many pests on them or diseases, just need to watch out for slugs, that's the only thing. But they'll grow quite easily in any sort of container. They need, I'd say, about 20 centimetres depth. So not a shallow pot, a biggish pot. And they're really happy. You just put something in for them to climb up, bit of bamboo cane or whatever, and they're really easy to grow. Most people like them. Kids like eating them. They're very sweet as well, so they just eat them raw off the plant. The other thing we had growing there, radish are very easy because they'll grow within about 6 weeks if you like their peppery taste. And lettuces will come up. Courgettes, they're quite easy to grow. You just have to nurture them a little bit when they're small, because the slugs will have a go, and most people have slugs, don't they, in the gardens around here? It's a bit damp.
Especially over the last few days.
Yes, definitely. I've seen some very big ones.
So have I.
But if you nurture them while they're little, once a courgette plant gets big, it has quite bristly, tough leaves, and they leave them alone then. So once you've got it past a sort of, I don't know, it's like about 10 centimetres high usually, they're pretty good. And again, just put them in a big pot and they'll produce loads of courgettes for you. I went away from my allotment for a week a while ago, and a courgette that was about, 10 centimetres long was about 1.5 foot by the time I got back. So at the minute we're being very creative with our courgette recipes. Trying to think of all the different ways to eat courgettes.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, I can understand that. And it's nice also to see how many community groups now are gardening and, doing food gardening and edible gardens. There's quite a lot of communities getting involved, aren't there?
Yeah, and there's a lot. I think there's lots of empty spaces as well, isn't there, around that aren't being used for anything. And I think a lot of local councils have been quite amenable to community groups taking over plots of land and putting some raised beds on and just starting growing something instead of just being a bit of boring grass that then the council have to cut all the time. You can actually put a garden in that space, and grow things.
Get other people involved.
Yeah.
That's a really nice way of doing it. Now, this time of year when we talk about gardening, I've been wanting to meet you today to find out what to do at home, because I must admit, at the front of the house and the back of the house at the moment, we've got the saddest looking trailing lobelias that you've ever seen, and it's time to pull them out.
Yes.
They look so kind of dejected and rejected at the moment. What would you replace them with? What have we got at the moment that you could put to add a little colour?
The things that are looking good at the minute, I would say, are lavender. Looks nice at the minute because they do flower a bit later in the summer, so you can get some lavenders now that are still in flower. There's a lovely yellow daisy plant called Rudbeckia, and that's an autumn flowerer. So if you got one now, it's going to carry on flowering through to the end of October. It's a nice sort of daisy plant. Something called echinacea, which is the coneflower plant, and you can get them in pinky colours and white colours, and again they're a late flowerer. Something which the bees love is called echinops, which is the globe thistle, and it has literally a globe flower on it.
Is that a purple kind of flower?
Yeah, and it opens up, it's all purple, and the bees absolutely love it.
Yes.
Especially at this time of the year when a lot of flowers are over. That's a popular one. And phlox is nice as well, and you can get some lovely scented phloxes as well, so you get the scent as well as the colour.
And we were mentioning with the rain that we've just had, snails and slugs, and I was talking to the neighbour next door but one who's listening in right now, and he was saying, is there ways we can control them without, is there anything, what do you do to try and control snails and slugs in the garden, Sue? Anything, any good tips?
Well, I think if you're trying to be organic, without using lots of chemicals in your garden, the thing that I do in my garden is I just put plants in that they don't like to eat. So I don't provide them with any food. I still have some slugs and I have to watch out for it. But for instance, I removed all my hostas because they're nice plants. They have lovely leaves, but the slugs love them.
Yes,
it's just like a little
I know that.
Smorgasbord for a slug. So I did
smorgasbord for a slug. Yes,
it
like
is.
that. Yeah.
So I had to take that out. So quite a few of the plants I've just mentioned, The globe thistle, slugs don't tend to like that because, again, it has bristly leaves, so they won't eat anything. Where you've got a leaf that's a bit bristly, a bit hairy, you'll find slugs aren't too keen on those, so that's quite good. Grasses are brilliant. You can get some lovely ornamental grasses in all sorts of different colours, and slugs generally aren't interested in those because they're not very succulent. Fuchsias do well usually as well, and they've got lovely flowers on them. So I tend to avoid plants that slugs like. I do a bit of a clear up in the autumn and take away any sort of dead leaves and things, because slugs tend to hide under any sort of nice little damp corners. So I try and keep the garden clear and not give them places where they can go and hide. The alternative is to use something where they do want to go and hide. So people use maybe bits of orange, half an orange, half a grapefruit. The slugs will crawl under those because it's nice and damp, and then you need to pick them up and dispose of them.
Right.
The problem is where do you dispose of them?
Yes.
They might go and liberate them in the park next door or something.
Yeah.
And there's beer traps. I don't know if you've ever tried beer traps.
Yes, yeah, quite a few people have talked about beer traps. In fact, as I say, Steve, who's probably listening in, is one for the beer trap. I know he's often told me that they seem quite successful to do it that kind of way. But there you are, you see, a few tips for you. So after the Manchester show, what's coming up next then, Sue?
Right, well, I've got a busy autumn. I've got quite a few courses I'm teaching on all different topics. I've got wildlife gardening, I'm doing a few of those, a bit more grow your own course as well, introduction to garden design, and a course on garden maintenance. So trying to cover a range of different things, really. And as well as that, I'm doing some garden design work as well for people, helping them out in their gardens.
And when you talk about wildlife gardening, again, I mean, to plant a wildlife garden, where would you can you easily find wildlife plants in garden centres these days, or is it something that you've got to search for, or again, is it trying to grow something from seed?
Yeah, I mean, in the really big garden centres, I've occasionally seen wildflowers, but they don't usually have them. You can get seeds in a lot of garden centres. A place where I tend to order my seeds from, I do it online, is a fantastic place called the National Wildflower Centre. It's over towards Liverpool, and they actually create wildflower meadows. So they put down lots of seeds. They're very experienced. They also produce seed. So when you buy seed from them, it's plants they've grown, they've collected the seed. So it's, from a good source and it's reliable. And I've used their seeds before. If you actually go and visit them, you can get plants as well.
Right.
But just usually they give you little plants to put that you can then put in your garden, and they'll develop. So and it's a nice place to visit because they have lots of different types of gardens. So they'll have a roof garden, a meadow garden, a shady garden, all different ideas for you if you want to recreate a bit of that back at home.
And that's near Liverpool?
Yeah.
And the company is again?
It's the National Wildflower Centre. Yeah, that's what they're called.
When you're doing a wildflower garden, what are the kinds of flowers that you like to see in a wildflower garden? What grows well and what makes it look as though it really is, so natural?
I think the key to that is knowing what sort of environment you've got in your garden and having a look at what you see around you as well, maybe in the local park or, what's around. Because although we think wildflowers are a bit like weeds really and they'll grow anywhere, they'll only grow in certain places. So if you drive along the motorway and you look at the embankments, you often see a sea of oxeye daisies.
Yes.
And they look beautiful, don't they? But they only like full sunlight and a dry soil. They don't like being in the shade. They don't like damp, clayey soil. So if you've got a bit of a wet garden, damp soil, oxeye daisies will not be very happy. So you can't always pick the things you like. Poppies people associate with wildflower meadows, don't they?
Yes.
But again, you need to have a dry area. You need to have soil that's not very fertile, because that's what they thrive in, actually, is soil that's quite low fertility.
Right.
So usually poppies and oxeye daisies will look better in a dry area with plenty of sunlight. If your garden's a bit damp and a bit shady, there's still lots of other plants you can have. There's something called purple loosestrife, which is a lovely flower that gets quite tall with a nice spike of pinky, sort of mid-pink flowers. That's very attractive. If you've got a boggy area, there's yellow flag iris, which will look nice in that and be happy. Something called bugle as well, which is a low-growing plant.
Yeah.
And that's got foliage most of the year as well, so it looks nice. There's sort of different variants of sort of purpley, dark green colour and spikes of blue flowers in the springtime. So it's a case of having a little look. And in fact, if you go onto the website of the National Flower Centre, they will give you advice. So it's picking a flower that will suit where you are, that's going to work in your garden. You know, I think that's the trick to it. Things that like the conditions that you've got, and then they'll thrive really well.
Right. Well, Sue, if you could tell our listeners where they can find out more about you and the various courses coming up.
Yeah. Well, the best thing to do is look on my website, and that's straightforward. It's sjgardenadvice, all one word, .co.uk.
Great. Well, I look forward to our next gardening encounter, and I shall be going home after the show and getting all the trailing lobelia out of the plots. So it'd be lovely to meet you again, Sue. Thank you.
You too. Bye.
Sunday nights from 9. Join Steve Franklin live for Preston FM's weekly request show.
Could I have some Pink Floyd for my mum?
Gino by Dixie's Midnight Runners.
Can I request 9 to 5 by Dolly Parton, please?
What a way to make a living.
Lavender by Marillion.
Sunday nights from 9. 103.2 Preston FM. The weekend stops here.